Okay, so here's a radio. You can obviously see it's working. Now, I got this off of eBay. It was sold parts or repair, and it's from a liquidator that I have bought radios from before. Usually all the radios I've ever bought from them before were store returns or warranty returns. They had a problem. Something happened to them. Usually the finals burned out, somebody's hooked up a power cord backwards and nuked a couple circuit traces or something like that. And they're great sources of parts, good face plates, stuff like that. They're just nice to have, if nothing else, to fix them up, and I'll keep them. Like the reason I wanted this radio, this is a new version of the 980 SSB. I want a sample radio of my own that I can experiment with. So I'm not experimenting on a customer's radio. So anytime a new radio comes out, I like to get one to have for myself. I'll probably never use it myself. Like I say, it's mainly to experiment with. If I need to tinker with it and modify circuits, I'm going to do it to my radio first. That way, if I let the magic smoke out, customer's not out anything. I let the magic smoke out of my radio. So I saw this, looked like it was in good condition, got it for a steal of a price. It showed up. I took the covers off. Looks good on the inside. No signs of blown off circuit traces or anything. Hooked it up to a current limited power supply, turned it on. No excessive current draw. It received fine. Transmit fine. Weather radio works. I was like, I don't know. And it looks like a brand new radio. I swear this thing has never been plugged in. Still has the factory clear plastic protective tape around the bezel. Still has the clear plastic film over the display. I was like, man, what's up with this radio? So I've already used this in another video, which will probably get uploaded before this one. And it was on the clarifier unlock procedure for this radio. But I had the faceplate off of this too. And I noticed something. I took the first screw out. There's 4 countersunk screws in the side, 2 on each side. When I pulled the screw out, I looked at it, I was like, why are the threads rusty? I looked in the hole, in the threaded part of the sheet metal on the side here. Rust. Took the other 3 screws out. They were the same way. Got me thinking. And it's a video I've wanted to do for some time, just never remember it and just haven't gotten around to it. No time. But I really need to get a video up about this, because this is going to become more and more of a problem for people. And it's electronics that have been damaged in natural disasters. Water. Water is our enemy when it comes to electronics. Now, most of these parts in here could care less about water. As long as it's not turned on when it gets wet, it's not going to affect a lot of times components. A lot of these capacitors, integrated circuits, semiconductors, stuff like that. They're waterproof. But there's a lot of stuff in here that can easily get damaged. Wiring can soak up water. Now, there's no signs that this radio was ever physically wet, as in it had liquid water on it. But I do believe this was probably from one of the recent hurricanes. This may have been brand new in the box, sitting in a warehouse, waiting to be sold. Maybe down in Texas, possibly. They had a flood, had a hurricane come through. Or it could be anywhere else, anywhere, not necessarily Texas. Could be anywhere in the country. But they had a flood. This radio was probably high enough up on a shelf that it didn't physically get wet. But that warehouse was probably underwater for days. And it was 100% humidity in there. So much so that, I've seen that happen in some of my own garages over the years. Water will condense on the underside of the roof and start to drip on the inside. The packaging probably got wet, because the only thing that was included in this auction is what you see. Well, with the covers. So, a radio, but no microphone, no manual, no power cord, no accessories, no nothing. Probably because the seller, the packaging was probably damaged. And it's not that they wanted to hide it. They sold it parts and repair. Their butt's covered. And that should be the first red flag. It looks brand new, but its parts are repair. Like I say, for me, I've bought from this seller before. A lot of times they're just store returns and damages. And that's fine for me, but I work on radios for a living. A lot of people watching this video, you probably don't work on radios for a living. If a radio is damaged, you're going to have to send it out to somebody like me or someone else to fix it. But so this video's on floods. Some of the things to look for. Now this one, like I say, it didn't get wet, and there would be absolutely no way whatsoever to tell that this thing had even been in a damp environment looking at it from the outside. Because from the outside, it looks, and still does, looks like a brand new, just off the factory showroom floor, fresh. The only signs I had was rust on the screw threads. The moisture got in there, it was stuck in those threads, and it rusted. Now, flood damage, which are radios that have been underwater, you want to avoid them like the Black Plague. They will be a nightmare for you for years and decades to come. It's the same as with a vehicle. Now, when a vehicle gets flooded, the insurance company will have the titles on those things flagged that they've been, and it has to be disclosed anytime those vehicles are sold legally that it's a flood-damaged vehicle, because just this radio and a vehicle are going to be exactly the same. They have wire in them, and that's the big killer in cars. Trucks, anything. It doesn't have to be a vehicle. It could be a piece of heavy machinery or equipment. Water, the wire acts just like a candle wick. Water wicks up in the insulation, into the wiring. The wire itself acts like a candle wick, but the moisture then gets trapped inside by the insulation. It starts to corrode because there's oxygen out here. The wiring starts to corrode at the ends, and it basically forms a little plug. So now the water is trapped inside of here, and then for years and decades to come, it's just sitting in there corroding slowly over years. And just one by one, they'll start to corrode in half or become high resistance, where they've literally corroded. There's no actual copper left. There's nothing but oxides left in there. IF transformers and stuff, easily damaged by moisture. They have tiny hair-fine wires in a lot of these things. It doesn't take but just a couple days of corrosion to happen to one of those little wires, and bink, they just break right off. Lots of other stuff can get damaged by water. But things to look for. And I've had a lot of water-damaged radios cross my bench before. I had an amateur radio. It was a Yaesu, what was that? FT107. So it was one of the tan ones. Nice, kind of rare radios. You don't see a lot of them. The radio worked. Customer wanted it basically restored. He knew it was having problems. So he figured, needs a cap job and an alignment. As soon as I got the cover off of it, oh my God. Called him up. I was like, I don't know how to tell you this. This radio is not worth fixing. Don't care how much money you put into it. It's just going to be, for the rest of time, a disaster. There's just going to be problem after problem after problem. Yaesu radios, that series of radio, had rubber feet on one side and a carrying handle on the other. So, you could actually set the radios up like this. And that's the way that radio had been setting when it was in a flood. Because from about here down, it was full of mud. Now you could, from the outside, the radio looked nice and clean. From the inside, actually, didn't look too bad. When you somebody had tried really hard to clean it out. But the problem was, you start looking in cracks and crevices, muddy water. You could see the thing had 4 or 5 inches of muddy water run through it. One of the dead giveaway, now like I say, from the outside it didn't look bad, but it did have a telltale trace on the outside. When you looked at the meter, so it had an old style analog meter, the needle was broken off. Well, the needle broke off because the meter movement was seized, and the needle was actually made out of aluminum. It had oxidized off and just broken off and was laying inside the meter. And you could see water, traces of water. There was a water line, because actually when that radio was standing up, like only half of the meter was underwater. So there was a visible mud line inside that meter. So half of the meter face was dirty, the other half of the meter face wasn't. Dead giveaway that radio had been wet. Now CB radios, if it's an older base station, they had wooden cabinets. But they're not, well, I don't want to say they're not real wood, but what you're looking at on the outside isn't real wood. It's a vinyl decal of wood grain on either plywood or an MDF, some type of composite wood. It may be wood on the underside, but there's a vinyl decal on it. I've had a Cobra 2000 here from a customer sent me. Again, sent it in, needs to be restored, cap job, and an alignment, and any other repairs it needs. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, this doesn't look good. I got the covers off of it, white. It must have been close to the ocean, and it was in like a storm surge. Salt. It was just full of salt. It just white. You couldn't see any color. The board was just a solid coating of white in there. Now that one was easy for me to see from the outside as well. So he had bought that on eBay, and if you'd looked closely at the pictures, you could have known that that radio was water damaged. The wood expands greatly when it gets wet, especially over its width. And the vinyl decal didn't. It's got adhesive on the back, and that could kind of slip. As the wood was pulling out, the vinyl decal tried to stay its original shape. So there, you could see the decal looked like it was about that much too small along the edges, where the wood had expanded out past it, or it kind of looked like the decal had shrunk. But it's not that the decal had shrunk, it's that the wood had expanded. Dead giveaway, that radio had been completely submerged underwater. The cabinet was soaking wet, the wood expanded, and when it dried, it stayed that size because it was plywood. It's not like a solid piece of wood where it would have shrunk back down. Plywood, multiple layers, cross-laminated. When that stuff swells up, usually it'll stay at whatever dimensions it was when it swelled up. But, yeah, dead giveaway. That was a clear sign that that radio had been wet. And like I say, once I opened it up, it was like, oh my God. Same thing, picked up the phone, it's not worth fixing. No matter how much money you put in this thing, it's just going to be trouble from here to the end of time. So when you're looking at pictures of radios, look for signs of water damage. Mobile radio like this, if it had been submerged in water, there's going to be signs of water unless somebody really goes through I mean, it's a lot of work. They physically have to completely dismantle the radio, taking out the display circuit boards and whatnot. But water is going to get in between the front lens and the display in here. There's no way to get that out without completely dismantling it. Most people aren't going to do that. They're just going to give it a quick shine up on the outside. So if it looks like there had been some type of liquid in between the lens and whatever is behind it, stay away. Good sign of water. If it had a wood cabinet of some type and it looks like it's the size, it's warped, or it has the, it's like I say, the CB radios, actually a lot of stereos, televisions, a lot of electronics in the 70s and 80s were like that, had the simulated wood grain on plywood decals. If it looked like the wood is expanded and the decal hasn't, another dead giveaway. It's been underwater. If it looks like there's mud packed in around buttons and controls and whatnot, again, it's not something somebody can easily clean off. They'd have to spend a lot of time trying to detail to get all that gunk out of there. That's probably what it is. It's muddy, gunky water. Because it's not like when you're in a flood, it's clean, clear, crystal. This is steam distilled water in this bottle here. I could soak this radio in this stuff, it'll dry. You'll never know a drop of this water ever hit it because it's all going to evaporate. Flood water is full of contaminants, diesel fuel, engine oil, gasoline, raw sewage, dirt, just everything. It's churned, everything mixed together. So like I say, it'll get in all the cracks and crevices. Severely rusted stuff. Now, older radios, don't be surprised to see screw heads like these. They're not, these are chrome plated, but you can see they're starting to get, it's just kind of grungy looking. It's got that pitted look. That just happens. That's old age. Radios in just a damp part of, or a humid part of the United States, or shoot, anywhere in the country. That's just going to happen after 20 or 30 years. Actually, these screws are probably like 30 plus years old, because I know exactly what these came out of. It was another one of my radios I just recently got. It's an old radio. But yeah, that is normal. But if it's severely rusted, just rust is blooming and starting to grow off of stuff, stay away. It's probably been wet. And that's the thing. Pit rust like this will take decades and decades to finally get to the point where it's just hard, crunchy rust. But when something gets flooded, it'll rust bad, and it spreads. And once you get a good coating of rust on something, it just continues, because that stuff's like a sponge. It just keeps soaking up water. The same thing with oxidation and corrosion. Once that stuff forms, it's a magnet for drawing in even more water out of the atmosphere, and just, it's kind of a self-feeding process. It just, the more corrosion there is, the more moisture it absorbs, which is just the more corrosion that it makes again, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. But, I feel bad for all these people that lose literally everything they own. Their entire life, it basically, the best way I have of describing it is the giant eraser comes down out of the sky and wipes everything they own off of the face of the planet. I feel so bad for these people. And I understand they're trying to recover a few dollars. They've lost everything, especially if they don't have insurance. They're screwed. There's no other way to put it. I feel really bad for these people. So I understand they're trying to get a few dollars selling stuff. And I don't have a problem with people selling flood damaged stuff. I buy flood damaged stuff that I know is damaged in a flood. But a lot of times I'm buying it because I want a faceplate. I've got a radio that's got a horrible faceplate. It's damaged. I could care less if the electronics are ruined. As long as the faceplate or the knobs on an old vintage radio look good, that may be all I want. I'm willing to pay $30 for, a bezel or something. I could care less if the radio works. That could just go in the recycle bin. But for the average person, they want to buy a radio for it to work. Yeah, just be aware that if you're selling something that was flood damaged, put it in the listing. Let people know. For starters, they'll appreciate that. People like me, I'm not afraid to buy something that's flood damaged. Like I said, a lot of times there's a lot of stuff that's not going to get damaged, plastic parts, trim and whatnot. I don't care if it got wet. It's plastic. It didn't do anything to it. But other people, it'll save you grief because the person's going to get it. They're not going to be happy they got something that was flood damaged. If it's on eBay, they're probably going to leave you negative feedback, or they could file a claim against you that you sold a flood item and it wasn't in the listing that the item was damaged in a flood. So yeah, try and save each other a bunch of headaches. Just let other people know. Like I say, there's lots of people out there like me. They don't care if it was flooded. They're interested in trim or whatnot. So something that's not going to get damaged by water. Like I say, this one I got lucky. It just was. It appears to have been in a extremely humid environment, probably for a period of time, and screws started to rust. But it was then rescued, taken out of its damp box, dried out, and it works fine. And this radio, honestly, will probably be fine forever. It will never have a problem due to moisture. Because it was never physically, dipped in water. But there you go, just a warning, something to be aware of with all the hurricanes and bad storms and everything happening, it seems, nowadays. Be aware of that. You're going to start seeing flood damage stuff, for sale on it, not just online. Shoot your local yard sales. The stuff gets around nowadays. Somebody buys something on eBay or, some other auction site or on Craigslist or whatnot, and it got shipped across the country, and then hell, that's broken, and they sell it to somebody else on the other side of the country, and it ends up at a yard sale next door to you, and then you buy it, think, it doesn't look bad, and then you get it, and well, unbeknownst to you, the thing had been damaged in a flood last year somewhere down on the southern coast, and you live up in, say, Minnesota. You're thinking, how in the heck did this get flooded? Well, it wasn't local. Somebody else got screwed, and they've just been passing that bad luck around to other people. So be aware. Try to really pick over pictures when you look at stuff. Signs of water, stay away. It's nothing but grief.